Let's now turn to a sort of introduction. Here we'll see what Linux is in general, where it came from, what caused this system to appear on the market, and what makes it gain more and more popularity. We'll start with an explanation of what Linux is. Linux, contrary to the popular belief, is not an operating system. In fact, the word Linux refers to only one program, which is called the kernel of the operating system. This is the core, on which the whole system operation relies. The rest of the operating system is in fact a set of different types of tools. The graphics display utilities, auxiliary libraries, tools such as word processors, graphics software, games. They're all parts of the operating system. Linux is really just the kernel of the system. It is also called the kernel, but it's hidden from the end user because the whole system is supplied as a ready-made kit of software pieces connected to the Windows kernel. The Linux kernel itself is publicly available at www.kernel.org and is free of charge. It's a website where all versions of the kernel are published in stable and test versions, from the historical ones to the latest. Usually you can find them there. The Linux kernel is actually derived from Unix systems. These were systems that appeared on the market in the 70s and 80s of the last century, even before DOS and later Windows was released for home computers. You could say that Unix and Linux are practically the same thing. Linux is a simplified and free version of Unix. It's based on Unix to a large extent. It draws from the Unix main ideas, principles of operation, objectives, architecture, and things like that. The original Linux, or Linux kernel actually, was in fact an implementation of assumptions made for a certain Unix system. The term Linux is commonly used to describe the complete operating system based on the Linux kernel, but formally we should call it the Linux distribution. In order to avoid artificial terminological division, in the following sections of this course I will usually use the term Linux, when I mean a distribution of Linux. Usually, the kernel is an integral part of the distribution, so we can assume that these two things are more or less the same. Linux was created in 1991. The first version of Linux was written by Linus Torvalds. In fact, he released the first version at that time, because work on it began adequately earlier. Linus continues to oversee works on the Linux kernel until now. To date, he remains the main person responsible for the shape of the kernel, the principles of its operation, its development, and so on. Since the Linux systems are becoming increasingly popular, they are widely used mainly in server applications, but also for desktop computers. Now, the situation that large companies like Google, Motorola, etc. in fact employ Linus Torvalds to develop and oversee the Linux kernel. Initially, Linux was written in such a way that it worked only on one pre-specified processor. Specifically, it was the Intel 386, and was totally non-portable. Linux was actually a project of Linus Torvalds on which he just wanted to learn how to program. Thanks to the wide community engagement, Linux has gained great popularity. From the completely non-portable solution that worked only on a computer, with specific processor and specific hardware, it has turned into something that can now run on virtually anything. From ordinary x86 CPUs through 64-bit to mobile phones. Some people may not be aware that Android is really Linux, only slightly modified by Google, but 100% based on the standard Linux kernel. Until recently, probably up to firmware 3.2, Sony allowed to install Linux on their console. This functionality has been removed for various reasons, although theoretically, Sony's equipment continues to support Linux. For example, Samsung manufactures TV sets based on Linux, which provides a full handling of multimedia in these TV sets. Graphics display, video display on mobile devices, network access, all that is already contained in the Linux system. Many manufacturers use the benefits extensively, and since there are many people developing the system, it can now actually run on anything that meets certain minimum hardware requirements. The Linux system is very flexible and popular, and we use it very often. That was even the case where network cards were created with a built-in microcomputer, which of course had Linux running on it, just to speed up the processing time of network frames, resulting in, for example, lower CPU usage, which could be used for other aspects of computer media processing, and thus speed up a network game by a few frames per second.